All of New York will know of this injustice.
We must see and not be seen. I don't want to get anybody into trouble.
What is being hidden from us?
Shame on you! Shame on you all!
Tell her to go to hell.
There is more here than meets the eye.
A reckoning comes to us all.
All I want is to be worthy of you, Sara.
Monsters walk among us.
Is something wrong?
No.
Underneath our skin, which of us are not monsters?
Welcome to Paley Front Row, presented by Citi. I'm Josh Wigler, entertainment writer for The Hollywood Reporter. The Paley Center is dedicated to celebrating excellence in media, especially now. To help them continue to bring you outstanding programs like this one, please go to paleycenter.org to donate. Today, we're thrilled to talk about the new season of The Alienist, TNT's critically acclaimed adaptation of the phenomenally popular Caleb Carr novel. This Emmy-winning and Golden Globe-nominated series is back for a second installment titled The Alienist, Angel of Darkness, in which our three intrepid investigators are ready to plunge back into the criminal underworld of 19th century New York City. I'm delighted to welcome the three actors who bring these characters so vividly to life. Daniel Brühl, Luke Evans, and Dakota Fanning. They're here to talk about the new season, which premieres this Sunday, July 19th on TNT with two back-to-back episodes. Thanks so much for being here, everyone.
Thank you.
I'd love to start at the beginning. Maybe this is the beginning. Perhaps the beginning is earlier than this point. But so much of the show of The Alienist hinges on the relationships between your three characters, Laszlo Chrysler, John Moore, and Sarah Howard. How did the friendship between the three of you begin? What are your first memories, your earliest memories of the three of you starting to get to know each other, starting to get to be familiar with the world of The Alienist? And Dakota, I'll start with you.
Well, I met both Daniel and Luke for the first time at our first table read, in 2017 in Budapest. And I think right away I felt like we were all going to get along really well. And I was really hopeful that we would be able to create a really wonderful friendship. And we really did. The first, we had like a kickoff party where we all, cast and crew kind of celebrated. And then I sort of stole the party and we went back to my apartment. And then poor Luke, couldn't get in my door. So he was banging on the outside and couldn't get in to join the after party, which we felt terrible about when we learned.
Well, that's what she said. That's been her story.
No, it's the truth. It's the truth. But no, since that sort of first week of all the pre-production stuff and then getting into it, we're all away from home for 2 6-month periods, and it would have been much more difficult had we not truly loved one another and created a close bond. And I think that the bond that you see on screen in the first season and in the second season is truly because of our bond in real life.
Luke, can you speak to that a little bit? This idea of, especially when you're shooting somewhere far from home, and you're away from creature comforts, you're away from the life that you're accustomed to, and you're really drilling down with your cast and crew to create something that, especially on the first season, you don't know how it's going to land, you don't know how it's going to assemble together. How critical is that camaraderie so early on?
Oh, it's majorly critical, even just for your own mental well-being and your enjoyment of the experience of being in a foreign land where you don't know anybody, and you know because you've read the script how much time you're going to spend with these two people, and it's a scary moment when you actually meet them. Luckily, I'd met Daniel before, so I knew what to expect, and he delivered. And with Dakota, I was very excited to meet her because I was a big fan. She's had a career twice as long as mine. And I was always going to be I was just intrigued to meet Dakota and how she was going to fit in with Daniel, because we're much older than Dakota. So it was like, I don't know how this dynamic will work. But there was some common ground we just found, unspoken common ground, where we all just respected each other very quickly. We found each other entertaining. And there was this sort of we dropped our defenses, our armor was dropped almost immediately which not only allowed us as friends to speak freely with each other and trust each other and laugh and be honest and talk about so many things you would never usually talk about with your colleagues, but that also then transcended onto the screen. You know, we were able to use that strength we'd given each other as friends to allow us to feel free on set. And, you know, we were free enough to tell each other, like, that line, that's not a good line for your scene. You know, I don't think that's a good line. You know, that shit went on. And it was fantastic to go to listen to somebody else who you trust and respect and admire. And they care about you that much that they have an opinion on your lines. And we would do this. We would work things through together as a team. So majorly critical. Doesn't always work out like that, I have to say. Not every production I've worked on, you have that rapport and that depth of friendship. But this one did. And thank God, because, you know, it shows. It shows on screen, and it definitely made my time in Budapest much more memorable.
Daniel, I'm so interested for your perspective on this, because playing Laszlo Chrysler, this is not the friendliest man on the planet. You know, very progressive. His values are in the right place. His intentions are in the right place. And he certainly has love and friendship for both John and Sara. But I feel like the warm, fuzzy feelings, they come a little harder for Chrysler than they do for these other characters. Did you ever feel a need to maintain any of that on set? It sounds like no, you guys were just hanging out and painting Budapest red every night.
That's what we did. 100%. Which is really, if you think of the long time we spent together, is really remarkable, because it was 6 months or 7 months first season, another 7 months the second season. And I think there was not one weekend when we did not meet up and made plans, you know. Which speaks for our chemistry and friendship. And I, as an actor, I need to get in and out of my part. I'm not a method kind of guy, so it would have been unbearable for me to be Laszlo Chrysler for 6-7 months, and I think it would have been for Dakota and Luke as well. So, no, I was having a great time, and also I fell in love with Budapest. Because it was great for the purposes of our show in recreating New York at the time, especially the grand architecture made it very easy for us to, you know, represent the Vanderbilt New York and, you know, the upper class New York. Then the backlot they built was amazing. But then also it reminded me of Berlin, where I live, how it used to be 10 or 15 years ago. So I really liked the vibe in the city, which made it interesting for us, you know, to enjoy some music and good food and nice company, getting to know some very interesting Hungarians.
So I live in Brooklyn. I live in New York City, and I was watching The Alienist with my wife as I was starting to research the show. And there's one moment where the characters are going to one of the pubs that's frequently seen in the first season of the show. And I point at the storefront and I say, Emily, that's Staubitz. That's our local butcher. That's where they're shooting this. And it's only afterwards that I realized, no, you filmed the whole season in Budapest. So for this New Yorker, very convincingly done, that you represented New York City well. Dakota, can you talk about transforming this city, transforming Budapest into 19th century New York City, and how that came to life around you from your experience as a performer?
Well, so the first season, I was still living in New York. I lived in New York for like seven and a half years. And so I lived on Lafayette between Spring and Kenmare. So a lot of that sort of Mott Street and Mulberry and Bowery and all of that kind of stuff that you see in the first season, and of course in the second season too, was the area that was my home for 7.5 years. So same as you, it was very exciting to look at an older map of, 1896 New York and kind of figure out where my apartment would be, or would have been. So that was really exciting. And yeah, I mean, just to add to Daniel, I mean, the found locations in Hungary, I mean, so many of the like Delmonico's and, any sort of those grand locations are actual buildings that are sitting there in Budapest. So that was kind of exceptional and exciting and really cool to think about what those buildings would have been a long time ago and what we were using them for now. And then I think you can't talk about this show without talking about the back lot. When you see exteriors that are the streets of New York and the carriages and the background actors and all of that, that's pretty much takes place on the back lot. We had two separate sort of pieces where you were able to turn corners and, to go around a full block. And it's really, I had not been on a set like that in quite some time. That was so period accurate, so authentic and realistic and kind of awe-inspiring. And so to be able to have so much of those locations be actually tangible and not just special effects. I mean, of course, when you're looking out at a big view, that's, on a blue screen and some things are added and that's also well done as well. But the stuff that's up close is real. And I think you really feel that in the show. And just as an actor, when you're trying to connect to a period that's such a long time ago and that, I myself will never experience, it was kind of everything to transport you back to that time and to put you into a different way of living and to see how the upper class and those kind of struggling, well below a poverty line, to see them, how they would have commingled or not commingled in that era. It just adds such an energy to what, and adds such an energy to the show, and it's what New York would have been like. So for me, it was the most exciting part to see that kind of the art department's work and the production design and the props and the costumes, of course. Everything was so specific and genuine.
Luke, from your perspective, what's your take on all of this and living on the back lot, turning that into 19th century New York City? You're someone who has great familiarity with working on huge productions of massive size, creating, Middle Earth, creating worlds that need to feel very, very lived in. What was your experience living in 19th century New York City in the middle of Budapest?
Well, I guess the designer's challenge was to allow us to work on a backlot outdoor set of New York City that you could look to the end of the street and there'd be you wouldn't see blue screen, you'd see a corner and you'd see other streets, so that, we could do traveling shots, because there was a pace about our show where there was a lot of often chasing or having to get somewhere quick enough to catch the killer or whatever it was doing. So without being able to use a carriage and to travel down these streets being pulled by 3 horses or running down the street being chased by something or chasing something, it would have changed the whole dynamic of the show. It would have, the face of the show would have looked different. So that in itself, when we saw it built and we were allowed finally to go and visit it after a few weeks of being in Budapest, it was just a very impressive structure. I mean, like you just said, we've all worked on huge movies, and probably one of the most spectacular I've ever worked on was the one in The Hobbit, which was Lake Town. It was a stilted set built on a fake lake in the biggest soundstage in the Southern Hemisphere. And, you could walk around it, you could feel like you were in a place that was real. And very quickly went on set, once our cars had dropped us off and the extras were on and the fires and the Chinatown and the cooking on the streets and the gas lamps were lit, you immediately, you didn't feel like you were on a set anymore. It was an incredibly immersive experience, and one that, I think we all relished, because it's not every day you get to work on a set that has had so much detail and effort and love put into it to make it as real and as authentic as possible. And they did a fantastic job. And what was really impressive for us to come back in the second season was to see that the face of the streets that we'd seen for 7 months a year before had now completely transformed into completely different streets with new hotel fronts. I mean, the Sarah Howard's detective agency on the first floor above these other shops, and I always think set design and production design is such a wonderful job because they get to transform something that isn't there. They build something from the ground up. And so we were all very lucky to have that to work on, and we did. We worked on it every week for 7 months.
Daniel, I think it's very clear to me, and I think it translates so well to the fans of the show, how close you all are, and how important that is to the dynamic that's represented on the show, for the believability of the characters, the believability of the setting. Yes, it's a lot about production design, but it's so much about the camaraderie as well. And there's a point where those two things meet that I'd really, it was one of the first questions that came to mind as I was watching the show, is what is it like to film one of these very intimate, close space carriage scenes where you're being shaken around in the carriages and we're seeing the carriages going around through New York City. You're all so close. It's clear that you know how to needle each other and get each other to laugh and to really to push each other in that way. How do you keep it straight during something like that? Walk me through a day in the life of a carriage scene on this show.
Well, there were many of those. And I remember in season 1 when Luke and I were shot at, and there was a real proper action scene that we shot in the woods, where I think Luke was quite brave, in getting out of the carriage, as far as I remember. Or did you? Or was it your double? I don't remember. Probably it was your double. No, we spent a lot of time in these carriages. What I loved was shooting scenes at night, because then what Dakota and Luke just said, the feeling of authenticity was mind-blowing, because sometimes you wouldn't see the camera, you wouldn't see the crew at night, so you just saw that gaslight. You saw some silhouettes, you saw the extras, the horses, the houses, but you were really transfixed, and you felt like you were living in 1896 or 97 respectively. That was purely amazing, to have the luxury of being able to time travel in a show. And it's only possible if it's very convincingly done, from the shirt you're wearing, the props you're carrying around, the set design, etc. So that was amazing. No, otherwise I was always worried about sound, because I hate to do ADR. So whenever we had these scenes in the carriage, I thought like, oh God, hopefully they're going to be able to use that. Very often we could actually, but yeah, that's what I remember from the carriage scene.
You either have that where you're actually doing the traveling, or sometimes you're just in a black sort of tent with Gabor and Laszlo shaking a makeshift carriage, pretending to kind of be the horse for some of the closer shots where you didn't need to see a window or something, for example. So you have very realistic and then very television show version of carriage scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to know a little bit about your entry points into each character. It's another thing that I think is so successful about this show, is the specificity of each of the three leads. They all bring expertise to the table. They all bring very singular senses of identity to the table. And I would love to know what it was that was the access point for you into each of these characters. Dakota, I'll start with you in terms of what was it about Sara Howard, whether it was something on the page or something that was part of your research process into the character, that you connected with, if not first, connected with the most consistently, was the thing that you kept coming back to when you would consider the character of Sara Howard?
I think the thing that I felt most consistently and connected to immediately as well was her desire to advance in her career, and really feeling like, what Sara has to present to the outside world is a face of strength, of toughness, of being direct, assertiveness, just to be heard. I think that was something that women of the time were faced with. And I think Sara is not someone who bows to the constraints of society for women, and is constantly pushing those boundaries and kind of knocking them down. And we see that in the first season, and we see glimmers of more. And what's really I loved from, right away, first episode of, Angel of Darkness, we see her office, and we see that she has stepped out on her own and opened her own detective agency. She has these other young women who are working for her and with her and learning from her. And she's, a mentor to them. And that these two guys at the beginning of the second season respect her as their peer. And, she's kind of no longer having to, Dr. Chrysler, of course, is somebody who likes to be in charge of things, and we do see some difficulties with him sort of letting Sara take the lead, but it's not because he doesn't think that she's capable. That's something that is in his own personality that he has to kind of deal with, and we see Sara sort of not accept it right from the start. And I love that. And I think another thing that we show even more in this season is what it means to be a modern woman in 1897. And I think it's very, very similar to what women then, now, and hopefully less so in the future, but the feeling that you have to decide what you're going to be. Are you going to have a career? Are you going to have family life? Are you going to have children? When, if you don't do it at a certain point, are you going to regret it later? Will it be too late? These constant struggles that I think are in the forefront of women's mind from far too young of an age, and so I think we see Sara dealing with that too, and what that means. And I think that's something that is actually a very modern notion that I think women today, women in my life, are still talking about and thinking about and worrying about. And we see the 1897 version of that, which is not dissimilar to the 2020 version of that. So, what I've always loved about Sara is that we get to see that strength and that toughness, but we also get to see her, especially in scenes with Luke's character, with John Moore, get to show vulnerability and to show, that she is a young woman and has, of course, so many emotions and desire and fear and all of those things. And so we get to see a balance of her being strong and also sort of whatever her quote unquote weaknesses are, which I think Sara also does a very good job of using those so-called weaknesses as a strength.
Luke, how about you in terms of what it was that helped you connect with John Moore as a character? What was your access point to playing this man?
Well, I've been thinking about how to answer this question, because he's sort of quite a broken individual, really. He's carrying around with him guilt, grief, loss of his brother. He's an alcoholic, a highly functioning alcoholic, but an alcoholic nonetheless, so an addict who is really not on top of it. He sleeps with prostitutes because he's been jilted by his fiancée. He's fragile. And I think all of those things were a challenge for me to juggle as an actor playing John, because I didn't want them all to overcome him, because he's an intelligent man. He went to Harvard with Chrysler, so he's had a great education, but he's missing something, and it isn't entirely clear what it is. For quite a long period of the story, the first season, but that was probably why I enjoyed playing him, because he did carry an awful lot of baggage with him. It's probably why Sarah Howard probably didn't want to come too close to him. She could see there was a lot to carry there, with this man who was struggling with his own demons. And what's wonderful about him, though, and I knew this was something that endeared me to him, was that deep down there was this. He wore his emotions on his sleeve. His heart was on his sleeve. He was a man of pride and of dignity, and he wanted to make someone happy, and he wanted to make people proud and make himself proud in the process. And during his development of season 1, he ends up being a very different human being to the one that we met at the beginning. And I guess as an actor, it's great to have an arc to work with and to develop. And when we got the script for season 2, that that was a joy because you could see that this was now a man on a different path again. So, you know, he's a man of reinvention and of, you know, admitting to himself his failures, but not letting them get him down and move forward, which I think is an admirable thing in anybody.
Daniel, how did you view Laszlo's arc in season 1? To Luke's point about the arc for John Moore and of course Dakota, the arc for Sarah Howard. Daniel, what did you see the arc of Laszlo as being in season 1, and where do you feel like that left him for season 2?
Well, in season 1, we saw a brilliant and smart, very dedicated, obsessive, arrogant psychologist. Feverishly and very, you know, passionately, you know, involved in his work and eager to, you know, solve that case with his friends. Brilliant in analyzing traumas of, you know, his environment, and yet being very traumatized himself. And when it came to introspection in season 1, we saw the emotional problems that Chrysler had, you know, to express them, to accept them, etc. Thanks to the help of his friends, thanks to the openness of also Sarah Howard towards the end of season 1, he was finally able to open up and express himself. And we see more of that in season 2. So that he finally is even able to get to know someone else. There will be a kindred spirit that we will meet in season 2 that really impresses Chrysler, because this person is exactly on his wavelength. And it is nice to see, and it was fun to play someone who is liberated, who has become a free man and emotionally far more open-minded.
Dakota, you touched on this in your assessment of Sarah Howard as a character, and I think it's one of the ways that The Alienist really resonates with the audience, is that it feels very modern, even if it's a show that takes place in the 1890s. Can you speak to some of the ways in which you feel like this show is capturing a spirit that is very relevant right now?
I think for me, when I'm kind of in something and working on something, you're not quite applying it to the outside world yet when you're in that process. You know, it is the story and it's the goal of the character. And, you know, certainly Sarah's arc in season 1 is to, you know, she has to open up about her own traumas as well to kind of come out on the other side. She is tortured in her own way, besides sort of the wanting to be a modern woman and being the first female to hold the position in the police department, just sort of dealing with her own childhood traumas, that sort of comes out. And so I think that in season 2, her next arc, we get to see her as a much freer person from the start, having sort of gotten that out to Dr. Chrysler at the end of the first season. But I think when you're making something, at least for me, season 1 and season 2, you're kind of in it. And so it's just the world that is written in these scripts and has been written in the books, and you're kind of not able to see outside of it until I watch it. You know, when I watch it now, I've seen season 2 and I've obviously seen season 1. I think you can't help but be kind of slapped in the face by the parallels to the news that we're watching every day around the world. And it's difficult because everybody wants their show to be relevant and to speak to the current audience and to be timely. You know, people love those words, you know, and while I think it's important, obviously, to be relevant and to connect with a modern audience, it's for reasons that I wish weren't so. You know, I wish that this was just an entertaining story, a glimpse in history of what things used to be like. And while it is that in some regards, it should be another, because I think we've proved that we need to continue to be slapped in the face by parallels to the past. And so it's another reminder, especially for younger people who might think 1897, what, you know, like because of course it is so different. But there are so many similarities to learn from and to examine. And I think that we have to use art as another way to examine those and to hold up that magnifying glass to truly understand how we can change things for the present and for the future, and to learn from the similarities. I mean, there's so many things. There's women's rights, there's racism, anti-immigration, the issues with the media back then. There's so much layered in there into a very entertaining story. But I think, when I watched it this time, it was actually very emotional to see some of the similarities. And I think that maybe even more so with this second season, people will see those parallels, and I hope be able to see them in a different way and learn from them in some way.
Daniel, to kind of merge this conversation with this idea of hopefully this is holding a mirror up. Hopefully this is furthering a lot of the conversations we're having now. But hopefully you're in for the thrill and you're hooked into the suspense of the story that is unfolding across the second season of this show. I've stopped starting interviews with asking people, how are you doing? Because the answer is always some shade of the same thing. And when I'm in my position speaking with somebody who's representing a show that is about to be launching a new season, I will often say thank you for giving us new content, for giving us something new to watch. So that's a wordy way of getting to the essence of my question is, what do you see as the value in a story like The Alienist right now that is not only topical, despite the fact that it's a period piece, but also that it's new content right now at a time where so many of us are still inside, so many of us are so concerned with the state of the world. And sometimes you just need a break and you just need to see Laszlo and Moore and Sara Howard do their thing.
Well, what I would say is that it's really intelligent entertainment. And it is hugely entertaining. As you just said, it's captivating, it's thrilling, it's dark. I was always fascinated by, darkness in shows if it's well done. So you have that. But as we also discussed today, it is a history lesson, but again, an entertaining one. So you learn a lot about New York at the time. You learn about society back then. You learn about political, social issues that, as Dakota said, are a shocking reminder that we did not advance in some ways. It is fascinating to see that some people, and including my part, were asking themselves the same questions as we do today. My wife is an alienist, and she says there's still many mysteries when it comes to the human mind. So it's interesting to see the very first ones being concerned about the same questions as psychologists nowadays. In the meantime, we were able to land on the moon, but we still don't fully understand the human mind. And it's interesting to go back to the first ones who dared opening up these layers and try to understand the human mind. Highly interesting. And so it's a very rich combination that people will hopefully enjoy as much as we did. And the important thing is that the show also changed significantly. There's a different punch, a different pulse, a different rhythm to it. So it doesn't feel like a repetition of season one, which is great. We evolved.
Dakota, as we're starting to wrap up and stemming from that point from Daniel, knowing that there was life beyond season one for The Alienist, and we are about to embark on Angel of Darkness, do you feel like there remains life in the veins of The Alienist? Do you imagine a world in which these stories are continuing with these characters into a season 3 and beyond?
Wow. Yeah. Well, listen, I've learned you never say never to anything. You never know what's possible. But I do think what's really good about, these 2 seasons is that they are able to stand on their own. They're able to stand on their own as The Alienist and The Alienist Angel of Darkness. And I think that's really important to I don't want to spoil anything in the end, but I just think that it's able to stand on its own 2 feet. And I think that's wonderful. And if there were life beyond it, they better ask me first. I felt so fiercely protective over the character of Sara this second time around, and protective of everyone. Like Luke said in the very beginning, we developed such a trust and a bond, not only personally, but actually on set character-wise too. The collaboration went even deeper with each other and with all the other, cast that returned, Matt Shear and Doug Smith and Bob Wisdom and, all of the people that came back. There was a deeper level of communication and creative collaboration that I definitely loved. And so, hey, I think Sara definitely has more to do. Whether we'll ever see it or not, I'm not sure. But hey, I love the character.
Well, I certainly hope so, and I certainly hope we find ourselves in a similar conversation at some point down the line. But let's wrap it up here. I do want to say thank you again to Daniel Brühl, to Luke Evans, to Dakota Fanning, and to thank all of you for joining us for this Paley Front Row conversation presented by City. Be sure to support the Paley Center and consider becoming a Paley member by visiting paleycenter.org. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.